Okay, Peter, I was hoping you could take us back to when this problem between the Liberal Party and Australian women began, because we know that the party itself was formed in part through the efforts of highly organized and powerful women's groups, and the party's founder, Robert Menzies, directed that specific leadership roles be reserved for women. So I guess maybe start there before we then get
Sure.
into what happened.
What's gone wrong?
Yeah.
Menzies designed the Liberal Party to be a party big enough for everyone, including women, and women were an essential part, he thought a vital part of the Liberal Party from the very beginning. The first woman to enter the House of Representatives was for the Liberal Party, Enid Lyons. The first Labor woman was Dorothy Tangney, who entered the Senate at the same election as Enid Lyons in 1943. But the two parties diverged there because while when Dorothy Tangney eventually retired from Parliament in 1968, she was still the only Labor woman in the Parliament. But there were 5 Liberal women in the Parliament by then. And there was a reason that the Liberal Party put a huge emphasis on women, apart from wanting to be a successful political party and wanting to appeal to half the country.
Yeah.
That's a small detail.
Yeah. No biggie.
That's right. And they didn't have to rediscover the existence of this exotic species called women.
That's right.
They knew it from the outset. One of the big philosophical reasons is that this was the era when communism was the big threat. And Menzies was the anti-communist, the staunch anti-communist campaigner against what he saw as Labor and its pernicious subjugation to socialism and communism. And women were seen to be a more conservative, socially conservative force and therefore politically conservative than Labor. So that's why it was so important to the early Liberal Party to make sure women were on side, and they were. The Labor Party really only caught up on the whole women thing in the 1990s. So it's a recent phenomenon that the Liberal Party has failed to appeal to women, and Labor Party has succeeded.
Okay, so I'm going to get into what happened at the election, but when did it start to go wrong? Do we know? Like, the Liberal Party obviously had that incredible beginning, I guess, with regards to women. So when did it start to go seriously wrong?
The peak of the Liberal women's vote, where the Liberal Party had its greatest share of women voting for it, was in 1996, Howard era. And as recently as 2001, I suppose that's recent, most women still voted Liberal. And it's just continued to decline from 1996 onwards. It's been gradual, but it's accelerated. So at the last election, we know from the Australian Electoral Study produced out of the ANU that only about a third of Australian women voted for the Liberal Party. Yet women make up by a slim margin the majority of the country. So how can the Liberal Party hope to win office again? And then at this latest election, we don't know for sure, but indications are it was around the same and perhaps a little less. And once again, 2 consecutive elections now where women of every age group voted in majority Labor and not Liberal. The Liberals, in other words, can't get women of any age to vote for them in majority anymore.
And just before we move on, was there anything that happened around 96, 2001? Was there any sort of major scandal or anything that sort of sparked the women's turn away from the Liberal Party, or not really?
Not really. It was a gradual transformation of the Liberal Party. One of the big debates you'll remember in Howard and the transition then to Rudd was climate change, where Howard initially resisted recognising the problem or doing anything about it, whereas Labor campaigned on it, and ultimately it was a big vote winner for Labor, for Rudd. And it was such a compelling case politically to do something about it that Howard changed his position and came on board at the last minute before the 2007 election. Women seem to be more concerned about the environment than men, and so that was a big and enduring influence. Can I just point out that, remind ourselves that in 2018, Kelly O'Dwyer, who was a cabinet minister in successive Liberal governments, she famously told the Liberal Party room that the Liberals were seen in the general public as being homophobic, anti-women, climate deniers. That's devastating.
Yeah.
Now, if she were to update that today about the Liberal Party's image, I think we can probably assume that she would say the Liberal Party today is seen as being transphobic, anti-women, climate deniers.
Yeah.
Now, that is a deadly cocktail, and the party has completely failed to deal with the problem that their own cabinet minister pointed out to them 7 years ago.
Okay, so tell us, just how bad is the result then with regards to female Liberal MPs in Parliament now compared to, say, Labour?
Well, although they had an internal review and recommendation 10 years ago recommending that they put up 50% of women candidates, pre-select 50% of women candidates for federal parliament, they went to this latest election with only a third. So it was already destined to fail. And of that third, only a few were actually pre-selected for or had winnable, so-called winnable seats. And now, as the vote count is coming in, it's still unfolding. We don't have the full results, but it looks like there'll be 40 or so Liberal MPs in the House. Of those, it's shaping up that there will be maybe 5 women.
Wow.
5 out of 40.
And then in comparison, you've got, Labour, all 7 newly minted Labour MPs in Queensland are women.
Yes, it could be a bit of a clue there. The other clue that the Liberal Party might pick up is that in the last 2 elections, excluding Saturdays, they lost 7 formerly Liberal Heartland seats to Teal, so-called Teal independents. Every one of them was a woman.
Yeah.
Every one of them. Another little clue there, that the Liberal Heartland was electing women who cared about, guess what their number 1 priority was? Women. Number 2, climate change. Number 3, integrity. And the Liberal Party ignored all of these signs, their own internal recommendations for year after year. And now we've reached the culmination point. Or maybe it hasn't yet culminated. Maybe if they fail to act on this problem, it could get worse. They could become an extinct party, like the Australian Democrats or the Communist Party or the DLP. It's possible.
Wow.
This is how political change happens.
Wow, that's incredible. And, you pointed out in your column that Peter Duttons' campaign specifically was very male-centric. He was constantly photographed driving trucks, pumping petrol in cars, wearing high-vis. It was sort of like the Fast and the Furious minus the muscles and the bikini-clad women and...
Well, it was furious without the fast.
Yeah, exactly. So was it really his policies that did him in specifically at this election, as opposed to the optics obviously weren't great in terms of appealing to women, perhaps?
Yeah, well, it was both. So it was the party organisation only putting up, pre-selecting a third of their candidates as women. It was the policy offering. And the single most powerful signal to women that the Liberal Party weren't interested in them was the working from home policy, which the Liberals announced a bit over a month before the campaign proper kicked in. And that it was very deliberate. Jane Hume launched it with a speech where she set up the whole argument for it, in which, by the way, there was no evidence. The policy was to require all federal public servants based in Canberra to come to the office 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And it was a great long speech she gave about it. The only evidence was one research paper from Stanford University in the US, talking about a different country in a different system, not the Australian public service. And based on that, they announced this policy. It sent a huge signal that the party was anti-women, of course, because women have benefited so much from working from home. And although the policy itself only applied to the federal public service, it just sent the signal that the Liberal Party is against working from home. And if they're going to start with the federal public service, where does it end? So that was a huge problem. And then that just kept rolling through into the campaign and the optics and the whole disaster.
And it's safe to say that women really did revolt. I think I saw some research put out by Redbridge which said that, in February they polled people in 20 key marginal seats. The first wave found that Dutton had a net approval rating of -11 among women. And then by late April, it was down to -28 among women. And it wasn't nearly as bad among the men.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
So they just really turned against him, I guess, in response.
Yes.
Okay.
And so isn't it interesting that even in spite of that, the debate this week about who to replace Peter Dutton with, two of the three leading names are men. I mean, that would be crazy. We'll see what they do.
Well, this is what I kind of wanted to ask you about, because we know that 5 out of 7 leadership positions in the coalition are women, and I think it's safe to say most of them were pretty much invisible during the campaign. Like, do you reckon that's a directive that came from Peter Dutton? What was that about?
Well, Susan Lee, the deputy leader, she was pretty visible, but that's very much the exception to the story.
Yeah.
And so she is, because she was the deputy leader,
Yeah.
she is now being talked about as the only woman possibility to lead the Liberal Party. They could do worse. But whoever is the first to take the leadership after this devastating wipeout will have to be prepared to be sacrificed on the altar of a party that's lost its way. It's going to be full of angry recriminations. So if whoever is anointed initially is unlikely to get through to the next election, so if they put Susan Lee up, she mightn't make it that far, but we'll see.
Okay, so why did all of this happen? I'm just wondering, because, we know that the party had its own internal review after the 2022 election, and it revealed much of what we've already talked about, that the Liberal Party was failing to appeal to female voters, and that, yes, it should pre-select women in 50% of seats. So did they just ignore it?
Yes, they did. Exactly.
Why, though?
They'd rather be comfortable with their existing boys' club and the factional system that has produced that. It's a lot of the blame for this falls on the factional system, which reproduces more of its own, right? It's reproducing itself.
Yes.
They'd rather do that than succeed. They would rather become extinct than change their behaviour to actively include women.
Okay, now that would seem, on the face of it, to be so irrational.
It is.
So why? Do you have any insight into why? Why?
Yes.
I mean, I understand, human nature, we can all be a bit resistant to change. It can be a bit painful. But if you're constantly getting information that this is, and, obviously, like you say, this has been a slow move, a slow dying, I guess, for the party. And they've been indicated for so long, this is the problem.
Yes.
Why would you avoid it?
It's a simple fact of people, networks of allies and influence seeking to reward itself and therefore reproduce itself. So it requires a drastic intervention. And remember, the state divisions are responsible for the pre-selections. And the state division, especially New South Wales and Victoria, have been in a state of total disarray, factional war. You'll remember in New South Wales, the Liberal Party state division couldn't even do the paperwork to nominate candidates for local government elections. Across the entire state, there was not a single Liberal candidate for any local council.
Okay, so here's my question then, because, like you say, there's been this very long-term resistance to change. Obviously people don't want to lose their power. But we do know, well, I guess the question is gender quotas, is this going to be a real answer for them? Because we know that Labour introduced gender quotas some 30 years ago. So I guess tell me a bit about what that process was like for Labour, and, whether you think quotas are what really might change the fortunes for the coalition, I guess.
Well, there was a lot of resistance in the Labor Party because the whole concept was seen as being anti-merit. We just do our pre-selections on merit. It was, the real argument was the factions just wanted to continue doing what they'd always been doing, and they had to be forced to change their ways. And that's what Labor did. They imposed the quota, and it's worked. So at the last federal election, there were just under 50% of the successful MPs that went into the parliament were, for Labor, were women. And at this election, it's going to be a little over, it looks like about 54% of the Labor caucus in the House this time is going to be women. So it's really worked. Now, as you know, Samantha, the Liberal argument is we're not going to do that because we're the party of freedom, of individual responsibility, of merit and of choice. We're not going to put a quota on ourselves. This is a pretext, this is nonsense, because the coalition imposes a quota at the core of its existence, which is with the National Party. they have a rigid formula about how many nationals will be in the front bench in the cabinet of a coalition government. So this is a group of people who work very happily and successfully. Well, let me rephrase that. They work very happily with a quota at the core of their organisation. So it's a straw man argument.
So do you think is there fundamentally some sort of anti-woman attitude or belief system then at work? I mean,
I thought it was really revealing that the party, when it was faced with a choice of leader between Julie Bishop and Scott Morrison, chose Scott Morrison.
And not only did they choose Scott Morrison, but in the most humiliating of ways. I think Julie Bishop got something like 11 votes in her favour or something. I mean, it was horrible, right?
It was. It's bizarre because she was by far the most popular. Her approval rating among coalition MPs was head and shoulders above any of the others. She had a high profile. She was actually competent. Maybe that's why they found her so threatening. So that was, as the Teal independent from the West Australian seat of Curtin, which was Julie Bishop's former seat, Kate Chaney has said, that was a sliding doors moment that showed her and many, many women that this was a party that was basically, as you've just suggested, Samantha, at its core is sexist. They simply did not want a woman leader. And they got Scott Morrison. They get what you deserve.
Well, it's never a dull moment with you, Peter Hartcher.
Well, we've been given this rich fodder by the electoral outcome to work with, and it's a remarkable one.
Well, thank you so much, as always, Peter, for your time.
It's a pleasure, Samantha.